Good morning from Los Angeles, dear webinar participants, dear panelists. Welcome to the online event dedicated to Czech traces in Alaska, the Arctic, and the High North. This presentation is hosted, as you can see, by the Czech Consul General in Los Angeles, as we hold the consular jurisdiction over the state of Alaska, United States only polar territory. As such, United States is an active member of the Arctic Council, an intergovernmental organization where the Czech Republic has the ambition of becoming a permanent observer. Our event will also uncover various Czech achievements in Alaska, Greenland, Svalbard, and other territories in the Arctic. If I may, I'll add that my role to present today's speakers is not quite arbitrary. From joining the Foreign Service 25 years ago, my first position as a graduate in Nordic Studies was one of a desk officer for Denmark, Iceland, and Norway. And this was just a year after the Arctic Council was established in 1996. I had the duty to report on Arctic activities and developments during my first posting overseas to Denmark, with responsibility over the Faroe Islands and Greenland, and during 30 postings that included Norway, including Iceland, and now most recently the United States and Alaska. I'm happy that so many of you found the time to share our interest in the High North today, and I, for one, will be a keen listener to all presentations that will unfold during this seminar. It is scheduled to run for the next 2 hours or so, and every one of you has the chance and opportunity to come forward with questions. The way to ask those questions is to submit a written message in the message panel. We will be taking notes on these questions, and they will be lined up for the Q&A session towards the end of this seminar. Hosted, as I said, by the Czech Consul General in Los Angeles, this event is organized with support of the Czech Center in New York and with the Czech Embassy in Washington, D.C. And D.C., Washington, is exactly where we go right now. And it is my fine duty to introduce our first speaker, the Czech Ambassador to the United States, Mr. Hynek Kmoníček. Mr. Ambassador, good morning. Please.
Morning, and thank you for introduction. Well, I will be relatively short, as it is supposed from the ambassadors. When the Czech Republic asked for the observer status, the first question I kept getting from the journalist was obvious one. Why? Why the Czechs and the icy countries far away from us? And anybody who tries to a little bit research the subject will find what you will all hear during all this event, that Czech is basically interested in the Arctic since the mid of the 19th century. It's not something like an interest which we developed in last 10 or 15 years through the fashionable subject of the climate change. It's really something what is very much traditional for the Czech science. And you will probably hear from people much more knowledgeable than I am about many names back in the history. And I know that our consul from General Consul from Los Angeles is preparing the book about the Czechs in Alaska, where he will reveal, as usual, that basically every second Alaskan has probably at least the Czech grandfather, if he's not Czech himself. But without joking, there is really a long-standing traditional interest of the Czech science, and vis-a-vis of that, also the Czech diplomacy about the Arctic problematics. You will hear how much we are active in Svalbard, Norway, in our station, which we still have the tendency to call by its original name, Spitsbergen. You will hear how the Czech Republic is now, if my numbers are correct, one of only 26 countries of this planet who has the permanent station in Antarctic. You will hear how the University of South Bohemia, where I myself graduated, tried to establish this very serious research Antarctic program after 1989. You will hear how the Czechs try to organize the polar conferences since 2012, basically every 2 years up to 2020. And you will hear so much that you will be as surprised as I were when we faced the task to put for the observer status request the summary of our activities in 2 pages only. For my own surprise, it was almost impossible task to summarize 200 years of the Czech achievement and science in that area in just 2 pages of the material, which we successfully did. If you want to know more, I encourage you to read that material. And let me conclude on the personal note, as Mr. Kmoníček did. Well, Antarctica is the last place where I have, the last continent where I have never served. Maybe one day we will have embassy even there, and I can see a lot of the nice faces of the people who would love to serve there. So see you in the future. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak a little bit about the Czech wish to join officially in the observer status, the organization we will be talking a lot about today. Thank you.
I wanted to thank Mr. Ambassador to Washington. We are back in Los Angeles, and I will be very briefly introducing our next speaker and my new boss. I'm an ambassador multiple times over, Mr. Jaroslav Olša. Before he was coming over to Los Angeles, I figured out that every previous posting he's been, he would write at least 1 book on the place he has been. Well, he started his tenure in Los Angeles a few months ago, and I can see that there is a first publication due. So I'm thrilled to hear more about it, as much as you probably are too. Please, Ambassador Olša, the floor is yours.
Good morning from LA, good evening to Prague. My first presentation on this webinar will be about the early history of Czech-Alaskan relations. You might ask, it might appear that the inhabitants of a small country in the Central Europe, which is less populous and no connection with sea, might have no really interest and connections with so far away distant place like Alaska. But it turns out that the reverse is true, with accounts attesting to significant scientific and discovery interests of Czech people in Alaska. I want to show you in a presentation some of the interesting moments in our shared history, which started 230 years ago. The history starts with Thaddäus Haenke. He was a Czech biologist who was an important person in Czech cultural life in the 18th century. He was born in a small village of Chřipská in northern Bohemia in 1761. And as an accomplished botanist, he was sent by the Habsburg Emperor to join the scientific expedition of Spanish Admiral Malaspina. On board of his boat Descubierta, he entered Alaskan territory via Yakutat Bay in 1791, 230 years ago in June. He was interested in biology and botany, and he collected many samples of botanical species from Alaska, which ended at the end in the Czech National Museum, where you can find them until today. He also collected various specimens from Tlingit people, like this interesting hat, which is now part of the Náprstek Museum collections, which is also the Museum of Asian, African, and American cultures, which is in Prague. What is most important is the fact that all his botanical collections, such as those from Latin America, Philippines, Guam, and Alaska, were organized and published after his death by Czech botanist Karel Bořivoj Plesl in 1825 to 1835. The books are important that they show really the variety of botanical possibilities in all these territories. Unfortunately, Haenke never saw the book because he died in the second decade of the 19th century living in Bolivia. He never returned back to his home country, and he died in mysterious circumstances. But he became the father of Latin American botany in the Czech Republic. But it was for almost 100 years afterwards when there were most probably no Czechs in Alaska. We can guess that maybe some got up to Alaska via Russia, because Russia and Bohemia were very much connected in the early 19th century, but we don't know about that. The first, more information about the hunters. Some of them came up to Alaska. One of them was Duke Colloredo Mansfeld, who was in Alaska and Yukon in 1904, 1905. And he hunted a lot of animals and he brought them to Bohemia. He was followed by another important personality, Philip Oberländer, who was a really avid hunter who traveled to all continents. And he also visited Alaska and Canadian Arctic parts in the first decade of the 20th century. In comparison with Colloredo Mansfeld, Oberländer wrote his adventures, hunting adventures in America, including Alaska, in one of his books, which was published in German and in Czech. Unfortunately, not much was published after, because he tragically died in 1911 at the age of only 40 years old, when he was stamped to death by a buffalo in southern Sudan. But what the Czechs really knew about Alaska at the turn of the century? Not much, because all the Czechs who were coming to Alaska were usually gold diggers. They were numerous people there, and it's quite a new thing because we didn't know about them until very recently. One of the group which came to Alaska was a son of famous Californian businessman of Czech origin, František or Francis Korbel. His son Joseph came to Alaska in 1898, and he soon had 60 persons worked in a gold mine there. But the operation stopped after a mere 3 years because, as it was said, barely they were able to pay for the costs of operation. In 1901, the company of Korbel was sold, and we see the photograph of the building on the right-hand side. Another Czech was successful. His name was Ottokar Střížek, or as we know, he was really named Strijzek. Strijzek became a person who lived in Alaska for more than a decade and made a fortune. After, in the 1910s, he moved to Seattle and became a banker in a small banks and became quite a rich person. And also in the 1920s, he became a honorary consul of Czechoslovakia, which he remained until 1937. As I said, there were many Czechs, and we really don't know much about them. And you see on the right-hand side names of them. And sometimes we know even that one of them was pub owner. In some others, we only know the second name. The others, we don't know what they were doing. And most probably they were not very successful because we only know that they lived there. We learned about them through the pages of Czech American newspapers, which were published widely in the United States. And they were keen and interested in stories from faraway parts. One of the articles which remain is now digitized starts with the sentence, hello from the Czech Eskimos. We are living in Alaska. And one of the writers was the barber Suchy, was displaying how difficult it is to work, live and earn money in Alaska. But there is one person who is well known in Alaska, unknown in the Czech Republic, and also Alaskan don't know that the person is of Czech origin. It is connected with Carrie McLean. Carrie McLean, in fact, was born of Czech parents in New York, and her original name was Karolín Štípek. Her father, Václav Štípek, was a fairly successful digger. But he brought all his 5 children from New York to Alaska after the sudden death of his wife, which was living with them in New York. All these 5 children learned the difficult life in Alaska in the 1910s, and Carrie McLean settled there, and we know that Nome has the museum in her name. One of her sisters also married another Czech gold digger, Bursík, and they lived in California later on. We see here one of the books by Carrie McLean, so well known in Alaska, and also a photograph of her sister married to Mr. Bursík. What a pity that we don't know where is the album of the photographs of the early life in Alaska Mrs. Bursík is speaking about in the article from the Tribune. We see the photo here. But there were also other Czechs who came to Alaska, and they are a bit forgotten. One of them was Emil Kruliš, a typical Czech American. He was born in Bohemia. As a child, moved to America and started studying there, became American citizen, but still in his early age, he was writing about his experiences and successes into a Czech language press. He became an assistant surgeon in US Public Health Service in Galveston, Texas, one of the places where many Czechs were living. And in the air, shortly before World War I, he was sent to Alaska to observe the situation of the people in Alaska. When he returned back, he wrote many articles about sanitary conditions in Alaska. One of them you see on the right-hand side. And he also started working on the first sanitary code for the territory of Alaska, which was successfully approved. And Kruliš started building a new hospitals and new system for the healthcare in Alaska. He also wrote a medical handbook, which was used by schoolmasters and helping the people with the basic illnesses. He had a distinguished career. He worked later on in Bureau of Indian Affairs, and in the 1930s, he even shortly served in his home Prague on the US legation there. Quite an interesting forgotten Czech in Alaska. And there is one person who is definitely not forgotten. Another Czech who was born in Bohemia, moved to America and became American citizen and American scientist. Aleš Hrdlička was born in 1869, and in the early years of the 20th century, he became an important personality of Museum of Natural History in Washington, DC. He was an anthropologist who fell in love with Alaska, where he first traveled in 1926. And he spent 9 summers there studying, digging, excavating, and writing about Alaska. He died quite suddenly in 1943, and I'm not sure if he saw any of his 3 books which were published then, which are quite an important sources on information. One of them is Alaska Diary, which you see on the left-hand side. Another one is, for example, Anthropology of Kodiak Island, which is still used as an important reference work. But what was the Czech imagination about Alaska until the end of the World War II? It started in the late 19th century, where the interest in Arctic was there. And you see quite a naive illustrations showing the Arctic. We see the ice, we see the snow and the boat there, but it's quite a naive. What is important is who was the writer. You see the name of it. It's Josef Kořenský. Josef Kořenský became an important person for many generations of Czechs. At least 4 generations of Czech young adults was reading his books until World War II. His books were a combination of a geography and history book with a popular parts, travelogues, and funny stories and interesting facts for the children. He covered all the continents, and his books had a very high print run, many editions and variations. He had a good luck that his friend was quite a rich businessman, and he took Josef Kořenský with him to many travels around the world, and he visited many, many places in the world. Most probably he has never been to Alaska, but he wrote many long articles about the life of Alaskans and about the lives in the northern Arctics. Kořenský died as a director of the secondary school in Prague in 1938 when he was almost 90, but his legacy still remains. His books are being sought, And they are still source of quite an interesting information, sometimes about the Czechs living in faraway lands, or even details and illustrations which we can't find today. But still, the most important was were the books which were translated from various languages, showing the life and work in Alaska and Yukon. And you see on these illustrations, the crossing of the Chilkoot Pass was one of the things which was most interesting for the Czechs. You will see it on many covers of the books about Alaska and Yukon published in Czech language in those years. But still, among all those books, which were at least 20 to 30, the most important were books by Jack London, but also the books by some Czech writers. On the left-hand side, you see quite a funny book by a most prolific Czech writer of the pre-World War II era. He was a very commercial writer, writing in a few days anything. And his book about Alaska has really not much literary value, except is the first Czech book which has the name Alaska on the cover. More interesting is the other book on the right-hand side by František Omylka. František Omylka was a fairly successful young adult writer whose most successful novel is this Štafeta, which means relay. And it's a story of 1925 Serum run to Nome, which was the historical fact he learned about. And he was so fascinated by that he wrote that quite a successful young adult novel. And not only successful among the Czechs, it has the English, Dutch, Japanese, Chinese, Esperanto, and many other editions. It's quite an interesting book which got into the world by a Czech writer about Alaska. Another of these books is on the left-hand side. It's by Vláďa Zíka, very popular young adult writer of the 1930s and 40s. It's named 7 Heroes from Nome. The most interesting on the book is that still it has been reprinted a few times in a most recent history, and also the cover, which is by one of the most successful Czech illustrators of the pre-war and post-war periods, Zdeněk Lyčka. And also we see once more a Chilkoot or something like a Chilkoot on a cover of the book of František Běhounek, a scientist who knew Alaska and who knew Arctics by a hard way. He was the part of the unsuccessful Nobile expedition in a dirigible Italia, which landed and they were stranded on the iceberg for many days and weeks. He lived there, survived it, and wrote many books which are also set in the Arctics with this very interesting experience. But as I said, the most important source of the information about Alaska and the Arctics were books by Jack London, which are extremely popular in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. And you see the cover of the very first edition of the White Fang, which was published in 1913. But there was another person who was maybe even more influential on creating the image of the Arctics, and it's creating the image until today. Czech globetrotter and adventurist Jan Eskimo Welz. He was incredible personality. Born in 1868, he got into Siberia, where he lived for many years. And by an accident, he got back to his homeland in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, then in the 1920s. And he was telling such an incredible adventures that they were published in numerous books, became reprinted, and also translated into English and many languages, most recently Korean. It's quite dubious character. Many of the things is visibly not true, and he was really a person who was describing his adventures in a very free way, probably combining the reality with his fiction. But it's a very nice book to read, and it's a very interesting way how to promote the Arctics. He died in Dawson City in the 1940s after living a solitude life where he was trying to create a perpetual motion machine, which he unfortunately hasn't succeeded to make. And you see some of the books were published in various languages. The 30 Years in the Golden North was quite a big success in the United States and Britain when it was published in the 1930s. Also, the French edition is the same. And you see, he's still popular until today. even as a topic of a book, illustrated book by New York-based Czech writer and illustrator Peter Sees, who wrote and made illustrations of a book, Small Tall Tale from the Far North. But 1940s, there was a war which practically cut Czechs from Alaska and the United States. And shortly after, in 1948, the communist coup caused that Czechoslovakia and United States became the enemies. Practically nobody had a chance to travel to Alaska, and nobody really can learn about what's going on there. Once more, the source of the information about were the books by Jack London. But what was interesting is that since the 1960s, his books were published in really high print runs, one of them even in more copies than 100,000. They were very carefully edited with a lot of introductions and contents with a very much scientifically studied and also illustrated by the top Czech illustrators. These books are beautiful, not only to read, but also to see and touch. You see some of them which were published in the 1970s and 80s. And through them, really the Czechs learned about Alaska. Only very rarely any translations which were set in Alaska were published, like that by Frank de Fresne, which is more about the life of the bears than about Alaska and its people. But also the 1960s and 70s show the interest of Czech ethnologists in Indians and Inuits in Alaska. Of these, three really became important. One book which is not mentioned here is by Miloslav Stingl, who recently died, was an expert in Indians and Pacific Islanders. The other is by Václav Scholz, named The Oldest Americans, which really covered the history, ethnography, and sociology of the native populations of North America, but also it was written very popular for the young adults. Another interesting book is by Evgen Strouhal, who is better known as an Egyptologist. He was a medical doctor who received a Smithsonian grant in 1972-73 and spent quite some time in Alaska. His travelogue, Meeting Alaska, is not only a travelogue, it's more like a combination of an ethnography history book with a travelogue, one of the most important Czech books ever published about Alaska. That's all, and I want to thank you very much for your time, and my colleague, Ambassador Zdeněk Lyčka, will speak about a more recent Czech history. Thank you very much, and I hope you will participate in some other events organized by the Czech Consul General in LA. Thank you. Goodbye.
It's so refreshing to hear more about your newly found passion for Alaska, and I hope this is not the last book you are going to dwell on in your endeavors on Alaska. And indeed, sometimes Czechs can find the most unusual connections with the Arctic. Many of you will know that our biggest exports have been for many years passenger cars of the Škoda brand. They are designed and made in the Czech Republic, and there are also other Škoda factories in China, India, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and others. And in 2020 alone, the Czech plants in the Czech Republic produced over 750,000 of Škoda cars. Back in 2016, a new Škoda model was unveiled. The name was partially artificial, Škoda Kodiaq. Well, not completely artificial. This car was named Kodiaq with a Q at the end, but pretty much in rhyme with the Alaskan Isle and fishing city of Kodiak with a K to start and end with. And the play with words brought the filmmakers to Alaskan Kodiak. The town embraced the idea and did something with its name, however briefly, in honor of the new Škoda SUV. A pretty short movie was shot, and I invite you to watch it as a breather, as an intermission, or just as a little bit of joke. I hope I get the video correct.
What sound does a bear make? Maybe a little bit quieter than that.
This is Jay Barrett at KMXT Radio. I'm here with Kodiak Mayor Pat Branson, and we're here to talk about something today that goes really to the heart of what Kodiak is all about, and it's our name Kodiak, and you're changing it. Why?
A little bit, just a change, Jay, from the second K to a Q. This goes back to the Aleutian language. You know, a lot of words have Q at the end.
I like that.
We put a Q on it and it becomes Aleutian.
Kushkanak,
Karak.
Kodiak.
I'm more for K in Kodiak.
I think a change is good, more for Q.
This is where I live. It's still Kodiak with a K.
I grew up here. I was raised here. I live in Kodiak.
In the Aleutian language, the Q's are more come from like your throat than a normal K does.
How would we pronounce it then?
Kodiak.
Kodiak.
Not that last one.
So we're going around town and putting Qs on the Kodiak signs. I need some help with something. You want to help me out? Put these Qs up.
What is this for?
Instead of the K at the end, it's the Q. I'm going to give you some Qs. You can take them out and put them all over.
You kidding?
No, I'm not. Say yes to the mayor. Okay. Yeah. To put the Q at the end of Kodiak, that would be helpful. You want to do that? Help me out?
Can you tell us why you're doing that?
It's a reference to the new Czech Republic Skoda car named Kodiak with a Q. This is pretty exciting, putting us on the map worldwide. Looks great, guys!
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Well, don't you try to hold me, I'm a man of the road, a lover of life, like adventurers of old. There's a whole lot of gypsy in my rugged, rowdy bones, and when I hit the highway, I'm a hitting it alone. I'm a man of the road, so none could ever tame.
Ta-da! That's what we're all about, out in nature and doing what we want to do.
This name puts us right on the map, and I gotta tell you, it stirs something deep inside to think that when this SUV drives all over the world, it takes our name with it.
Very cool car.
I think that's cool. Kodiak's a strong name.
That is pretty awesome.
He says he wants it.
In the Caribou country, in the wild barren land, this is the country where legends are born.
Skoda, simply clever.
Well, how about that movie? I double-checked, and I believe no politicians were harmed during the making of this video, because as of this day, Mayor Branson is still the mayor of Kodiak. The next speaker that I'm happy to introduce is a person I've been looking up for most of my career with the ministry. Ambassador Zdeněk Lyčka has been one of the few people at the ministry who's always tried his best to bring the North to Czechs. And he's discovered in many ways and fashions, exploring by himself, being an ambassador, or making many presentations and writing books and translating them. For the next presentation, I'm very happy to connect to the Czech Republic and to welcome Zdeněk Lyčka. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will have two small presentations. One is connections between Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and the Czech Moravian Brethren. And the second one is Czechs and Alaska today. So I'll put the share screen here. So can you see the whole screen? Fine. Okay. The western part of the Arctic, Greenland, Canada, and Alaska, was partially baptized by Czech missionaries in the 18th and 19th centuries. They belonged to the original Protestant Church of the Czech or Moravian Brethren, which was established in the Czech Lands in 1457 after Jan Hus or John Huss's burning at the stake in the German town of Konstanz in 1415. And this is the place where Jan Hus was burned. After the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, the Brethren began to be persecuted by the Catholic Church, and after the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648, most of them were forced to emigrate. The exiles, both from Moravia and Bohemia, were called the Moravian Brethren. The most famous Czech exile was Jan Amos Comenius, also known as Teacher of the Nations, and he is also at the Czech 200 crown banknote. The Moravian brethren and sisters, however, were not exterminated because powerful noblemen held their protective arm over them. In 1722, a smaller group of exiles arrived in a manor of the young, religiously tolerant Count Nikolaus Ludwig von Zinzendorf and began to build a new colony in Upper Lusatia. Its name Herrnhut, or Ochranov in Czech, around 15 kilometers northwest from the town of Zittau on the Czech-German border, meant that it was under the Lord's protection. In just 2 years, about 600 inhabitants lived there, and more immigrants were still coming, both from Moravia and Bohemia. And now we have a picture of Herrnhut today. Count Zinzendorf supported the Herrnhut missions abroad. In 1736, only 47 brethren lived in Herrnhut. The remaining 600 people were in missions around the world, for example, in South Africa, on the Ceylon, in North America, and Greenland. The missionaries were mainly Czech and Moravian brethren, while the Germans stayed mostly at home. The first Herrnhuts, the cousins Matthew and Christian Stach and Christian David, came to Greenland in 1733, where they met with the Lutheran missionary Hans Ehre, who had been living on the island already for 12 years without having baptized a single Greenlander. In Nuuk, today's capital of Greenland, they built a mission station called New Herrnhut. Later, they established 2 more stations down south called Lichtenfels and Lichtenau. The first Brethren's failed exploration journey to Canadian Labrador, led by Matthew Kuntz, took place in 1752. The missionaries Johann and Elisabeth Schneider were more successful, and they joined the group of 14 people who, in 1771, settled in Nain. It's here, Nain, yes. As far as Alaska is concerned, the first Brethren missionaries arrived there in 1885 and built a church in Bethel. Bethel is here. They built a church in Bethel 3 years later, but only the works of the member of Alaskan Moravian Brethren named Uyakak, rightly pronounced, born around 1860 to a shaman family, can be considered a notable example of a Czech footprint in Alaska. As an indigenous Yapik, Uyakak transformed himself from an illiterate adult hunter into a maestro of linguistics. At first, he created pictograms. They are here. Before developing a Yatun language script that converted the sounds of the Yapik language. They are the pictograms here. Reverend John Hintz, a missionary of the Moravian Brethren in Alaska, invited Uyakak to their headquarters in Bethel so that the budding linguist might continue to develop his newfound talents. Uyakak sought to use the new script to record as many biblical stories as possible, assisted in his reading by Hintz. However, Uyakak refused to perfect his English language skills, fearing that proficiency in this language could undermine his cultural identity as a Yapik. Over the ensuing 5 years, Uyakak's scripts describing Yatun were developed from a pictographic form into a syllabic one. This then enabled a translation of parts of the Bible, which have been preserved to this day. And you can see on the right, the Lord's Prayer in Yatun language here. Uyakak then taught this new script to missionary assistants so that they could use it during their religious work. In his role as a missionary, Uyakak managed to convert entire Yapik communities to Christianity. However, most of the inhabitants of Alaska were adherents of the Roman alphabet as taught by Hintz. By 1979, the vast majority of the population assumed the writing format preferred by the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. Uyakak's system was nonetheless of great interest to linguists, representing an evolution from illiteracy to proto-syllabary, similar to the logograms utilized in numerous ancient written languages, including Chinese and Egyptian, albeit in this case compressed into a time frame of a mere 5 years. Even though eventually the church itself finally replaced Uyakak's syllabary with the system of written letters and words adopted across the Canadian and American Arctic, to this day, there are people in Alaska able to read Uyakak's script in their original form. And that's all about missions of Czech and Moravian Brethren. And now we are at the second part of my lecture, Czechs and Alaska Today. With the Velvet Revolution of 1989 and the resulting fall of the Iron Curtain, many Czechs set out to re-explore a world from which they had largely been barred for 40 years. The United States naturally became a favored destination, with some of the Czechs braving a visit to the northernmost reaches of the Americas, including the state of Alaska. Stories from Alaska are often contained in the global or Pan-American travelogues by many Czech authors. I'd like to mention Martin Mikiska, born 1966, and his 20,000-mile-long Autumn, Hitchhiking from Alaska to New York, published in 1996 and reprinted in 2001. Short travelogues and reports from Alaska have been regularly published in Czech magazines, for example, in the most popular geographic monthly Lidé a země, People and Earth. Over the past 2 decades, the travelogues of Choceň native Leoš Šimánek, born 1946, have found particular favor with Czech readers. Šimánek has authored more than 30 books, most of which are devoted to the United States, the country to which he fled following his escape from communist Czechoslovakia. Following his post-1989 return to his native country, Šimánek authored and largely issued via his own publishing house countless richly illustrated Alaskan travelogues, including Canada, Alaska, Adventure in the Wild, Alaska, Extreme is here, Extreme Adventures through the Northern Wilderness, here, Building a Log Cabin by the Lake Clark and Traversing to Alaska by Rivers, or Pacific Coasts, here, Pacific Coasts on inflatable dinghies from Canada to Alaska, and others. Moreover, Leo Šimánek was inspired by real-life experiences to write the novel In the Grips of a Polar Winter. Similarly to Šimánek, Miroslav Podhorský, born 1945 in Havlíčkův Brod, also fled Czechoslovakia following the 1968 occupation. Back home, after the Velvet Revolution of 1989, he began publishing travelogues and popular educational works. During the past 50 years, he has made repeated trips to Alaska, traversing its waterways by kayak and canoe, through lakes, rivers, and along shorelines. But it was only in 2002 that he published his first book, Direction Alaska. It's here, followed by further works dedicated to Alaska. For example, Alaskan Wilderness, Glacier Bay, the Ice Belt of Alaska, through Alaskan and Canadian Wilderness, Alaska Yukon, it's here, A Paradise for the Ice, Awestruck, Yukon, Alaska, or Alaskan Fjords. Podhorský's lifelong fascination with Alaska also led to his authoring the historical work, The History of Alaska, A Land to the East of the Sun, Russian America, 1732 to 1867. Stanislav Chládek, 1937 to 2020. In the 60s, a member of the Czechoslovak national kayak slalom team and both a multinational champion and a world champion in his field, fled Czechoslovakia in 1969 following the Soviet-led invasion. In the United States, he continued with his career in science and research, working at universities in Texas and Michigan. He also partook in a number of expeditions by sea kayak, including to the Aleutian Islands, where he undertook studies of native cultures. Chládek is the author of a notable book, In the Footsteps of Whale Hunters in the Northern Pacific, a chronicle of the lost world of the Aleutian kayakers. The book describes the lives and customs of the Aleutian people and their language. The subtitle of the book, Aleutian Kayak Odyssey, underscores the fact that Chládek visited most locations on his sea kayak. Alaskan Diary, describing the extreme environment of the Alaskan coastline, is another significant work of its kind. The book, authored by Richard Konkolský, born 1943, is filled with information about Alaska's past and present. In 1975, Konkolský became the first Czech to sail around the world by yacht. However, following his escape to the United States in 1982, he was erased from history by the Czechoslovak communist regime. After his post-Velvet Revolution return, Konkolský authored several books on his global travels. Countless Czech mountaineers continue to visit Alaska. The first Czech woman to climb the summit of Denali, then Mount McKinley, in 1976 was Věra Komárková, 1942 to 2005, who lived in the United States and Switzerland from 1968 and was an important botanist. In 1991, the mountaineer Radek Jaroš, born in 1964, also climbed Denali, becoming the first Czech to climb all the world's 8,000 meter plus mountains without the use of supplemental oxygen. Also of note are a number of extreme Czech sports persons, for example, Jan Kopka, born 1963, a 2007 winner of the annual 1,100-mile-long Iditarod Trail Bike Marathon through the Alaskan wilderness. Kopka described his exploits in the book In Alaska's Claws, published in 2007, reprinted in 2015. But the first Czech to participate in the classical Iditarod dog sled racing competition was Petr Hanzlík, the author of the book Marš, Go, which is the first Czech publication to focus on the training of Czech mountain dogs. Czech-American Misha Willies lives in Alaska and regularly partakes in the Iditarod competition. To this day, Milan Šindelář left, having gained the necessary experience as a dog manager and musher in Eagle River Anchorage, organizes dog sled racing competitions in Czechia. Scientist Jan Lukačevič, right, of the Cosmic Physics Department of the Czech Academy of Sciences, has also set out on dog sled across Alaska. His scientific team works to develop experiments for some of the major space missions of both ESA and NASA. Alaska became a filming location for some Czechs too. Ladislav Moulis Sr., a graduate of the Summer School in Prague, has spent a quarter century presenting, promoting and propagating the state of Alaska in cooperation with the public broadcaster Czech television. Around 500 Czechs regularly travel to Alaska every year for employment-related purposes, working on fishing boats or in fish processing plants. Others work on oil platforms or in forestry. For some of these, Alaska has become either a temporary or often even a permanent home. One such example is Vojta Novák, founder of the firm Alaskan Fisherman, who alternates his time between Alaska and the Czech Republic. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Zdeněk. Thank you, Ambassador. And I do appreciate the extensive resume of both historic and contemporary Czech probes into Alaska. It's not a goodbye from us to Zdeněk in Prague. We are going to see more of him throughout this presentation today. Right now, provided she's online, and I can see she's online, we'll be moving to our next speaker, Dr. Barbora Halašková, whose occupation is at my own university, Masaryk University in Brno. She's working at the Department of International Relations and European Studies, and also notably, she is the vice chair of the International Arctic Science Committee's Social and Human Working Group. I'm very happy to see you. The connection seems to be smooth. Welcome. Please join us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a lovely introduction, and thank you for having me. My connection is not really stable, so I'll try to speak slow, and I will praise and hope that you will hear me well. So let me just open a very brief presentation, and that would be mainly focusing on how Central Europeans or Czechs view the Polar Research Cooperation, which is part of my work as well. As you already said, I'm an assistant professor at Department of International Relations and European Studies, Faculty of Social Studies at Masaryk University in Brno in the Czech Republic. Recently, I also became a director of an interdisciplinary research center called ARCTOS, Arctic Center for Human to Environment-Oriented Studies, Impact of Climate Change and Human Activities in the Arctic. It's a long title, but shortly we keep with the title ARCTOS, and I will talk about it in a minute a little bit more. I believe this might be also an opportunity for some of you who are listening and would be interested to get involved or cooperate with our center. This would be a really great opportunity. And as Ambassador Kmoníček also mentioned, I'm a Czech delegate and also vice chair to the Social and Human Working Group of IASC, the International Arctic Science Committee, which is one of those advising committees to the Arctic Council. So this is also interrelated with my work and also with the Czech contribution to the Arctic science. What I always say that our work talks or speaks on our behalf. So I'd rather speak through the work that I've done together with my colleagues. In 2017, I've published the analysis for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, which basically for the first time really comprehensively analyzed the Arctic region from the political or international relations perspective, if you wish. And I will talk about that in my brief presentation as well. And last but not least, just last year, together with my colleagues from Canada and Finland and Austria, we've published really comprehensive analysis of all Arctic states, policies and strategies, which has been used by also different Arctic states in order to improve their strategies. And for example, Sweden or Iceland in their chairmanship of the Arctic Council program, they've actually adopted some of those recommendations that we've pointed out in our analysis, and of course not to mention the Finland, because the analysis or the whole research was sponsored also or co-sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. Starting with the ARCTOS, the center that was recently established at Masaryk University. The aim is to investigate the impact of climate change and human activities on natural environment in the Arctic, while we focus on both the challenges and risk assessment in terrestrial ecosystems. And we also investigate the relation of natural environment changes to the human to environment interaction. We also look at the consequences for the geopolitical, legal, and security developments in the Arctic. And eventually, what we are working on, besides presentations and publications, we also develop risks analysis and recommendations for mitigating the impact of environmental changes on the natural environment and also populations in different specific Arctic territories. So this would be one of those first-hand connections between the Czech polar science, meaning, of course, we are well known, and our Czech polar research in natural science has been really well known in the world, but this was something that I've took as my personal goal to actually look at the Arctic from the perspective of political science and international relations, because this field hasn't been really developed so far. So with this center at Masaryk University, we have, it's really interdisciplinary. We have scientists from natural science field, polar ecology. We have also international lawyers, and we have colleagues from our faculty focusing on energy security and geopolitics and armaments and so on and so forth. So it's really truly interdisciplinary team, and we hope that the center ARCTOS will serve as also as a hub for future research and cooperation in this field. So that would be about ARCTOS. since I've mentioned Social and Human Working Group of IASC, I'll be again very brief here. You've probably heard of IASC, which is, as I said, one of the advisors to the Arctic Council. And there are different working groups, atmosphere, cryosphere, marine, terrestrial, and social and human, which I'm part of since when I was nominated in 2017 as a member. And just recently, 3 weeks ago, I was elected as a vice chair, which also gives me an opportunity to shape the Arctic research and focus of the Arctic research and Czech contribution to it. So I feel very honored to be part of that, and also hope to contribute with my expertise together with other colleagues from other countries, because as you might know, IASC is the committee itself is composed of both Arctic and non-Arctic states scientists. So this is really unique, that brings both the Arctic and non-Arctic state scientists together and to work on the joint interests and research field. So this is another part of the work that I call it a small drop to the ocean of the problems, but at least this is a small contribution that I love to present. Next, I've mentioned the analysis for the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The analysis or the report really comprehensively is looking at the Arctic and also potential for the Czech involvement in the region, for possibilities of involvement of Czech companies. And this is something that has been, one of those publications that also started the public discussion about what Czech Republic can do in the Arctic and what we are doing there in general, and especially what's most important, what we can do in the future. So also the analysis proposes to formulating Arctic policy of the Czech Republic, which should define the principles and aims of the Czech Republic and Czech presence in the region. This is something I believe we truly still miss from the Czech government's perspective. So this is I still hoping and waiting for that will be developed soon, especially if our observer status is accepted to the Arctic Council, as it was mentioned in the beginning. And as you might know, the Czech Republic in last December, beginning of January, submit the application to become an observer to the Arctic Council. So fingers crossed, it's now we are counting days, not even weeks, when the ministerial meeting of Arctic Council will happen in Reykjavik, or perhaps most of it online. So let's hope and let's see what the Arctic states will decide. And this document is really nicely covering up the whole region itself and all the different aspects of scientific and security and economic and research perspective. So if you're interested, it's been unclassified for a while now, so it's freely available, and I attached the link here so you can check it out later on if you wish. Unfortunately, it's in Czech. It's just a very short summary in English at the end of the book, or the analysis, but yeah, Google Translator will do if you wish. So I would then continue to the next analysis, the next book that was recently published, which is called The Arctic Policies and Strategies, Analysis, Synthesis and Trends. And humbly, I can say this is really most comprehensive analysis of the Arctic and non-Arctic states' policies and strategies to the Arctic. We've also looked at the permanent participant, the Arctic Council declarations, and Arctic Council chairmanship program. So we really did very detailed research, and we look at different trends that can be observed in those strategic and official documents of both the Arctic and non-Arctic states, and see, what is the focus actually of the Arctic states when it comes to their involvement. I mean, obviously some of the Arctic states with smaller or larger parts of their territories belong to the Arctic, but sometimes it's not really very direct and obvious. So we were looking at that, and of course we were interested in looking at what is the driver of non-Arctic states to the Arctic, and that's where you can find out all the answers in. Although it's again a small warning, it's more than 300 pages long, but there are some nice graphs and tables, so that if you want to have a quick stop, then you can jump right to them. And as I said, this publication was sponsored by the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and IASA, the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, based in Austria. And together with my colleagues Lassi Heinonen and Karen Everett and Anja Reisel, we've put this publication together after more than a year-long research. So again, I attached the link here in case you would be interested to dig deep into the book. Please feel free. And I will finish with something that I've promised in the beginning, and as the Central European Polar View, looking at where is the contribution of Central Europeans through the cooperation initiatives, perhaps not purely focusing on Czech US or Czech Alaska cooperation, but there's been the cooperation of Central Europe, or some Central European countries, including Austria, Czech Republic, Germany, and Poland. There is a very limited research, or almost non-existent, in Slovakia and Hungary, unfortunately. But a few years ago, there's been this initiative, if I'm not mistaken, started by our great colleague Peter Schweitzer, who's member of the Austrian Polar Research Institute, and other colleagues, and especially Professor Josef Elster, who will speak, I believe, right after me, might know better about this cooperation, since he's been involved in it as well. Nevertheless, the cooperation is not really truly active. To my knowledge, there's been just few meetings, and still the cooperation is rather limited, but yeah, at least some contribution. And of course, it's not only the Center for Polar Ecology at South Bohemian University in České Budějovice, or my hometown Masaryk University. We also have polar researchers at Charles University and other Czech institutions. So actually, our contribution it's not purely research oriented, but I believe that also with our that simply the impact of what we are having and what we are bringing on the table is it's going beyond the research, and general awareness of Czechs' involvement in the Arctic, and our contribution is really really notable. And I would really love to see being Czech Republic part of the Arctic Council, at least through the observer status, although we are already involved in different working groups of the Arctic Council. And it definitely reflects the needs of polar scientists, and it contributes to the prestige of the Czech Republic among our key transatlantic partners. So it's not only that, hey, scientists are knocking on the doors of the Arctic Council, but we want to be there, but it's also vice versa, because we are really bringing strong science on the table, and our scientific contribution, and not only, within the field of the Arctic, but since we are here today talking about the Arctic and Alaska, this is something that we can truly contribute with. So I really hope that within few days we will know the results, but I still hope as maybe similar as the ambassador Zdeněk Lyčka. I'm still optimist, and I hope that we will get the observer status in the Arctic Council. So that would be very briefly from my side. I thank you for your attention, and eventually at the end, if you have some questions, I'd be really happy to answer that. So thank you.
Indeed, Dr. Halašková, I'm quite confident that your own work and your team's work in the field of Arctic security, research, environment, politics, economics in general, they will continue to be contributing to the activities of the Czech Republic once and if the Czech Republic gains the permanent observer's status in the Arctic Council. Fingers crossed for that. And one of the aces in the competition, in our bid to make it into the Arctic Council as the permanent observer, is the physical presence of a Czech Republic's own polar station called Josef Svoboda Station, located in Svalbard. And I will invite back Ambassador Zdeněk Lyčka with a short presentation on this phenomenon on Professor Josef Svoboda.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for the word. Let me tell you a few words about Josef Svoboda. Professor Emeritus of the University of Toronto, Josef Svoboda is a Canadian Arctic tundra scientist and botanist who was appointed Officer of the Order of Canada for his pioneering research on tundra ecosystem and for his lifelong mentorship of scientists studying the Arctic. Josef Svoboda was born in 1929 in Prague. He graduated from high school in 1948 and then began studying biology and philosophy at Masaryk University in Brno. His involvement in student underground politics prompted his arrest at the age of 20, and then he spent almost 9 years in various prisons and labor camps, including a uranium mine. In the Prague spring of 1968, at the age of 39, Josef Svoboda left for Canada to complete a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Western Ontario, and then he earned his PhD at the University of Alberta in Edmonton in Arctic plant ecology. In 1973, his teaching and research career at the University of Toronto, Mississauga began. From 1973 until his retirement, Josef Svoboda studied the Arctic plant ecosystem in Nunavut and other parts of northern Canada. And as said at the beginning, in 2019, he was appointed Officer of the Order of Canada. His Excellency, the Right Honorable Richard Wagner, Administrator of the Government of Canada, presented Josef Svoboda with the insignia of the Order of Canada during the private virtual ceremony on the 5th of March 2021. The Czech Arctic Research Infrastructure in Svalbard, run by the University of South Bohemia, was named in Josef Svoboda's honor in 2015. And now I would like to invite you to a short mute presentation about Josef Svoboda, about 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Lyčka. I personally find the naming of the polar infrastructure by the name of Jaroslav very fitting, and the short story is quite convincing. Our next panelist has been instrumental in Czech Republic's making physical present in Svalbard, territory of Norway. Professor Josef Elster is a polar ecologist, founder of the Center for Polar Ecology at the Faculty of Science at the University of South Bohemia in České Budějovice, and, as I've just mentioned, a co-founder of the Czech Arctic Research Infrastructure named after Josef Svoboda in Svalbard. In my years, I worked in Norway. The ambassadors I worked under welcomed Professor Elster during his travels to the polar station many times over, yet somehow I never had the chance and the opportunity to meet Professor Elster in person. So today I'm thrilled that I had a chance, however virtually. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate that I could be with you and give the presentation, and I also appreciated the information which Barbara already gave and Zdeněk, because I will continue with Josef Svoboda's story, let's say. Could you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Okay, so I am a professor of microbiology at the University of South Bohemia, and I am working in polar science since 1988. And I had a chance when I graduated in my PhD. I have got the invitation from Professor Josef Svoboda to follow his research team in High Arctic research camp in Aleutian Islands. And from that time, and finally, I spent there almost 3 years working with students, with colleagues of Josef Svoboda. So we, of course, we came to be very close friends, and not only with Joseph, but with many colleagues and friends who are doing the research in Canadian Arctic. But of course, this research is also connected with the Alaska and Greenland. So my presentation would be more personal, because I have still a lot of friends in Arctic science, and of course Joseph has been the person who somehow seated and rooted this let's say scientific school in Czech Republic, and we are trying to continue in his research, in his philosophy, and also in the view what we are doing and what we should do in respect of the climate change. So as you can see on this picture, the North American Arctic is really huge, and Josef Svoboda has been working in several areas across the Canadian Arctic, but most of his research has been in Devon Island and on Aleutian Island, but he has been working also a lot in area of Hudson Bay. And finally, you will follow that he really established a school which came and started to already in Czech Republic, in Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences, which I would like to introduce. So I will just repeat what Zdeněk said, but Josef Svoboda is a leading specialist in Arctic botany and ecology. And when after Velvet Revolution, just few weeks after this revolution, Joseph already came to visit us, because for a part of his career, when he left the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, he has been working as a technician in Institute of Botany of Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences. And I did my PhD also in Academy of Sciences in Institute of Botany. So we are closely related. We have also many friends at this level across the Academy of Sciences. And also, Zdeněk already said Joseph's history, that he has spent really almost 10 years in prison. And then finally, but what we have to mention, that because he started his university studies in Masaryk University, and his focus was the philosophy and biology, but we also somehow learn from him a lot of, let's say, in respect of philosophy, because he's very well educated in philosophy, not only in biology, but also in philosophy. So he's really excellent teacher in both in biology and philosophy as well. And as I mentioned, because at the time when he has been working at Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences, he has been technician and he has been part of the International Biological Program. So he has followed the project which somehow map and studied the wetlands, the shallow wetlands, which we have in our country and in South Bohemia. We have huge areas which are covered by wetlands. So Joseph some participate on this program, and it was such a roots, because when he came to Canada, he started to study also the wetlands in high Arctic and also in subantarctic, but also, as I will mention later, his son Michael also studied the wetlands in the Arctic. And so as Zdeněk said, when he graduated in his PhD, he started to be assistant, associate, and finally full professor and professor emeritus at the University of Toronto. And I have been working with him since 1991 up to 1994. This is his PhD thesis. When he finished the PhD thesis with Professor Bliss, and Professor Bliss is also a very famous Arctic ecologist and Arctic plant botanist. And Joseph has published many papers, but he also has been the member of this, let's say, Arctic science family, and he edited also many or several books which has covered the ecology of Arctic plants as a circumarctic subject. So he came to be very famous Arctic ecologist and botanist. And as I said, he invited me to follow his program, and we studied the algae and in process of primary succession, because let's say 30 years ago, when this process of the climate change started, there was such a scientific question: what is happening, how the life is following the glacier retreatment, how the plants, how the microbes follows this process of retreatment. So we studied this process because in respect of vascular plants, there has been many studies, but in respect of microbes, we have much less studies which are focusing to this subject. So we have just built up such artificial streams, and we have observed how the microbes follow the natural stream which has been following these artificial streams, and how microbes start to occupy this new environment. And we have somehow supported this system by glacier water coming from the top of glaciers. And you can see that finally the process of the soil development and of the life succession start from this type of microbes. And we have been asking which environmental parameters limits this process. And we have found out that nitrogen is, let's say, basic elements, which we have a lot of nitrogen in atmosphere, but from the atmosphere, the nitrogen is taken down with the precipitation, with the snow to the glaciers, and it is stored in the glacier ice. And finally, when the ice is melted, a lot of nitrogen is coming from this melting water, melting ice. And we have showed that the nitrogen is really principal component which start the process of primary succession, which support the life after glacier retreatment. And of course, because I have spent there almost 3 years, we have published several papers which describe this process in respect of the diversity, but also in respect of productivity. What biomass is produced by this type of microbes, photosynthetic microbes, and how these photosynthetic microbes start the process of succession of the life evolution in this type of ecosystem. And of course, because I came to Canada for first time and start to follow Joseph's group in 1991, so I followed all these prizes which Joseph got from the time. And as Zdeněk mentioned, the last the prize was the Order of Canada, but Joseph have got many prizes, so you have to see and also he got the honorary doctorate in biological science in Masaryk University. I have to mention when he came back from the prison, of course he tried to study again at Masaryk University. But of course, it was during the communistic regime, and he couldn't continue in his studies. And he applied for Charles University to finish his studies, but even he cannot continue in Charles University in Prague. So, so he finally left to Canada, and he finished studies, as we have learned from Zdeněk. But somehow his university in Brno, in Masaryk University, just remember him, and he has obtained the honorary degree of doctorate. So somehow the Czech Republic somehow gave him this prestigious prize as a apologizing for his time when he has been in Czechoslovakia. And of course, because he has been working for such a long period of time in Arctic and in very active research in the Arctic, he has obtained several prizes related with the Pioneer Award or with the Northern Science Award, which is always given to a person who is very famous in science or in some subject of human activities in the Arctic. So we are somehow proud how many prizes Joseph obtained during such a relatively short period of time. And because during the International Polar Year 2007-2008, because I have been working with my students in several locations across the Antarctica and also across the Arctic. And of course, the Svalbard from Central European science is the most accessible area. So I have been working in a Japanese, British station and in Polish station in Svalbard. And at the time I have got offer from the Norwegian Polar Institute that the Czech Republic somehow developed the science in the Arctic. And we have been invited by Norwegian Polar Institute to establish the station. So 2010, I have got the support from Ministry of Science and Education that they would like to establish the Czech research station in Svalbard. And step by step, we developed the department at our university in Faculty of Science. Then we developed the research station in Longyearbyen, field station in Billefjorden, and finally we have built up also this little boat which help us to support the research in high Arctic. And all together we named Josef Svoboda because he really rooted the modern science in Czech science in the Arctic. And because as I mentioned, I have still a lot of very nice friends, and I have spent also a lot of time with Joseph's family. And when Michael has been the secondary school students, he started to come with Joseph and to visit different areas across the Canadian Arctic. And finally, when he finished his studies at the university, he came to be expert in biology, in Arctic biology, and he started to work for Canadian Wildlife Service. And I am also proud because Joseph and myself, we started as an expert in wetland ecology, and Michael is now working as an expert for conservation of Arctic flora and fauna, mainly in Arctic wetland ecology. So somehow the circle is closing, and Michael is continuing in research which Joseph started over the many years in Czech Republic, and I am also following this type of research. So of course, Misha and Misha's family, Michael's families, they are living in the Arctic, they are living in the Whitehorse, and of course, the direction or distance between the Toronto or Erindale College or Burlington to the high Arctic, it's quite far. But Joseph with his wife, Luina, they are visiting, and both are coming to the high Arctic and visiting even Alaska. So this is the picture when Joseph celebrate birthday 90. So the family is really keeping together, and you can see how the parents and Michael and also the great Charles are happy to share this society in high Arctic in Alaska. And of course, as I mentioned many times, I think Joseph was really inspiration for most of us, and I am doing my best to follow this inspiration for my students, for young Czech scientists who could continue in Arctic research and learn how we can understand Arctic ecology more and how we can help and protect the Arctic. I think in this global changes, which are one of the most important global questions which we have, which present science has. So we have to follow these ideas, and we have to somehow participate in international research related with the Arctic science. So thank you for your attention, and it was my great pleasure to introduce Joseph Svoboda as the Czech Canadian scientist.
Thank you, Professor. While thanking Professor Elster for his presentation, I would dare to add my private remark that it's a particular feature for mostly all Czechs that they are too shy, too humble about their own contributions. And all thanks go to Professor Elster and his work in promoting our achievements in the Arctic. So once again, thank you very much for your presentation. I also want to state that we are pretty much on time with our presentation. I can also mention that we are open for questions, and those participants who want to come up with a question, they should avail of the chat button on their screen, and they should just type a quick question. We will take it up and we'll answer it pretty short. Our next stop on our way to the Arctic leads us to the Arctic proper. We can't go any more higher probably. Since 1999, Frank Nosek has been the extended arm of Czech diplomacy in Alaska and pillar of our consular service in Alaska. Frank Nosek has been also promoted to the rank of Honorary Consul General. And via the video link, I can also see that Consul Nosek is joined by Jitka Storm, the president of Czech Alaska Society. I'll be very happy to welcome you both to our webinar. I'm happy to give you the floor and look forward to your remarks. Frank, Jitka, hello.
Well, hello to all of you, and I'm getting a little bit closer to the screen. I'm sorry to get my face so close, but I think the microphones perform a little bit better when I am closer to the screen. So while we appreciate all of the scientific and adventurers who travel to Alaska and help us so much with their studies, there is another element of life in Alaska, and those are the folks who live and work here. There are not very many of us, but there is a fairly significant Czech community in the state of Alaska. And just to orient you mentally to the scope and size of Alaska, it is the size of Europe. So when we travel in Alaska, we have to use whatever means are available to us. In the winter, that means rivers and snow, but for the most part, it's by air. We do have now an improving road system, although it's quite limited. It's quite a bit more than we've had in years past. So the airplane is significant in Alaska, and we have Czechs out on the Aleutian chain. They come in to visit me for various documents that they need. And that's like a trip from Rome to Prague. And our trips from the state of Alaska down to visit our Consul General in LA are big trips. They require 2 days of travel for however short the meeting would be. So we've appreciated the concessions that the Czech government has made for the citizens, whether they're immigrants or heritage Czechs in Alaska, to maintain their ties to the Czech Republic by registering their marriages and children and doing other things that are necessary for them. We have, and have had for a long time, an interested group of primarily immigrants living in Alaska. And to my knowledge, they started informally, and of course, as you would appreciate and with a little thought would have realized, they started with the women. The Czech ladies got together. They wanted to preserve their language. They wanted to preserve their customs. They wanted to pass them on to their children. The husbands were busy working, making a living, participated when necessary, but it was the women who got the organization started. And so while I had been in Alaska for quite a while and had the privilege of seeing the state of Alaska form a government in the 1960s and look for people to fill all of the normal slots required for a government to operate, judges, administrators. There weren't enough people at that time to do all those jobs, but they've been filled adequately since then. But that was quite a development to watch and participate in. We had another development in Alaska, which was the oil development in the late 1970s. And we found out that there is absolutely nothing that can't be accomplished without spending a lot of money. And there was so much money to be spent. All of the things that the mineral geologists and the oil companies were trying to accomplish got accomplished. 800-mile pipeline up to the Arctic Ocean and the delivery of oil to the free markets by freighters. And I did get a chance to spend a fair amount of time in the Czech Republic starting in 1989 and watch the developments there as well. So I appreciated the Czechs in Alaska who wanted to preserve their heritage and ties to their country And so when I was eventually appointed as an honorary consul, I solicited the help of those ladies, and they were the backbones of creating what we now have as two essential Czech organizations. The principal one is the Czech Alaska Society, a nonprofit corporation. We don't handle a lot of money because most of it is used for Pilsner or Kell and the picnics and for food and drink at our polka get-togethers. But that organization was given a boost by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who had a program at that time to encourage the development of Czech-related organizations in the U.S. And I think that there was a grant of around $1,500, as I remember it, and that got the Czech Alaska Society incorporated and off and running. And sitting with me today is the current president, and for the past number of years, the president of the Czech Alaska Society, Jitka Storm. So these ladies have organized an expanding entity. We now have Slovaks involved. We have a lot of friends, both in the Canadian provinces from British Columbia, the Yukon, and into the Northwest Territories. And we have about, I would say, somewhere between 200 and 300 email contacts for those Czechs who want to become involved in their everyday life here in Alaska. So that's the Czech Alaska Society. There's an active group. It consists primarily of heritage Czechs, but also quite a few immigrants. Surprisingly, the scientists, the adventurers who visit, some of them do stay, and they stay for the same reasons we have all come to Alaska, primarily for adventures. We want to be able to look at the rivers and use them and look out our windows and see the mountains. So we live with that wonderful visas every day and appreciate it enormously. We are helped by almost everybody who has spoken today. Some of you have not logged into our Czech community, primarily in Alaska, in Anchorage, when you visited, but the others have, and they've left a significant mark and have been very much appreciated for the visits here. So on behalf of the resident community of Czech immigrants and heritage Czechs in Alaska, thank you enormously for this presentation. I can't wait for the publication of this publication to be finalized so that we can contribute it to our museums and libraries here in Alaska. It's going to be enormously interesting. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Frank, Jitka, thank you so much. It's always a breeze of fresh air, literally, when we connect to Anchorage. And I'm very happy that we had no glitch, no matter how far you are. The connection was seamless. I'm so happy that you could join us today. The session still goes on. We have still a few more minutes left. We are now open once again for questions and answers. So far, I only am asked one, and that's going to be very easy to answer. The question was raised whether or not we are going to make any note of today's event. We are indeed. We hope to edit this broadcast and to publish it at least on the website of the Czech Consulate General in Los Angeles. So yes, the answer is yes, and the event is planned to be screened, to be available for later showing by anyone who's interested, compatriots, scientists, anyone alike. Right now, I would like to invite back Ambassadors Olša and Lyčka for their recapitulation of the event. Gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope my voice will be better now, but as we said, we will try to re-record the presentation. I hope you enjoyed that small presentation of ours saying how Alaska is interesting to us and how we can show the world that our observer status in Arctic Council is really aware of our option. And I hope also that we will go further on into the history of Czech-Alaskan relations, having the small book which we wrote with Ambassador Lyčka to present in Alaska later this year or early next year. And I hope you will enjoy some other events and other functions connected with Alaska and the Arctic and the Czech Republic. And I pass the word to Mr. Lyčka.
Yes, thank you. I think I would like to answer one of the questions, because there was a question on the Moravian Church members coming to Canada and Greenland. They came to the United States, as I know. I've got the information from Suhdol. There is a society called Moravian, and they told me that they came to Alaska first in 1885. So they were first in Greenland, and then they went to Canada and to Alaska first in 1885. And the question was also about whether they took the music with them. Yes, and until today in Greenland there are some marks of Czech music of the Moravian Brethren that they took with them to this island. So I don't know about Alaska, about the United States, but maybe there was also something. But I know that in Greenland there is something from the music of Moravian Brethren. So that's all, I think, to the question. And to today's seminar, I think one of the reasons why we met today is the publishing of the book Czechs in Alaska. And we would like to publish the book also in Czech, in the Czech language. And it's up to Ambassador Olša's contacts with the publishing house to settle it. I am prepared to work further on it, and maybe if there's someone from the listeners today, if you when you get the English version into your hands, if you can add something more and some clarification or something which is more interesting for Czechs than for the Americans, we would like to include your remarks and your small mentionings to the Czech version. So don't hesitate to contact us, and we will work on it. I think I don't know, Jarda, when should it be published in Czech? Probably.
I would say that first we do the English edition, which will be done in a matter of a few weeks now, as we know, and we can hope and we can wait for some time until the people read it. I would say that it could be later this year or early next year when the Czech edition will be published.
Yeah. What about the exhibition? You prepare also exhibition?
Yes, there will be a small exhibition made on the basis of the book. In fact, the book was supposed to be the catalogue of the exhibition, but everything because of COVID went absolutely opposite. It means we'll have the book and the exhibition we would like to show in Alaska in cooperation with Consul Mr. Nosek, sometimes late this year, early next year. The exhibition will be in English, but of course, there is no problem to have such an exhibition also to show in Czech language in the Czech Republic or anywhere else.
You said so. We started it was a small project. We were thinking about, let's say, 15, 20 pages, like a catalog to the exhibition. And now we have about 55 or 60 pages.
Yes.
And
it's more than 60 pages, because there was the one of the interesting things that more and more new information will arise when we were writing on it. That means we already started with a booklet, which may change into the Czech book, which might become a real book if some other people will bring some new information to us.
Yes, and I got accustomed to, got new friends among mushers and mountaineers and kayak drivers, and so it's fine. It's very good. I think I liked the work on this book because it was something new for me, and I've never been to Alaska, I must admit, but I was in Greenland several times and crossed Greenland on skis, and so I know something about the Arctic. But I think Alaska, it was a new chapter for me, and I was very, very satisfied with the work and then the result that we have now on the table.
Once more, thank you very much in that case. And if there are no other questions, I think I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank all the listeners who are staying with us today. And I hope we will meet on some other occasions, either personally or via Zoom. And I will pass now to Mr. Jaroslav Olša to finalize the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I was watching carefully all the presentation, and in my view, all these presentations, they only confirm that the Czech links to Alaska, to the high north, or to the whole of Arctic are long-lasting as well as current. And first of all of them are very relevant. And I would like to see all of this as an added value in the Czech Republic's bid to the permanent observer status in the Arctic Council. For Czechs, for us, it is a natural choice, and we just hope to be the natural choice for the Arctic Council, which is on its way to the meeting in Reykjavik pretty soon. So this is also our humble bid to be successful. I want to acknowledge the participation of Ambassadors Kmoníček, Olša, Lyčka, of our scientists, Dr. Halašková and Professor Elster. I want to thank Frank Nosek and Jitka Storm. And I also want to acknowledge the technical support of Aneta Campbell of our out team in Los Angeles. Thank you for your participation. Thank you, participants. And thank you all the visitors who found the time to spend this Los Angeles morning. From us, it's a lunchtime break. For you, somewhere in Prague, it could be dinner time. Wherever you are, take care, be safe. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.